A woman stood alone at the mouth of a canyon where the desert wind carried the smell of old blood. No patrol had crossed through in 11 months. The Apache widow made sure of that. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. She woke before dawn every morning in a shelter built into the rock face, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The entrance faced east so she could watch the sun break over the flats. She kept no fire after sunrise. Smoke drew attention, and attention brought questions she had no interest in answering. Her name had been spoken once by a captain who tried to negotiate passage 2 years back. She didn't correct him when he got it wrong. Names didn't matter out here. What mattered was the line she held and whether anyone would be fool enough to test it. The pass cut through a formation of red stone that rose 300 feet on both sides. It was the only route for 60 miles that didn't require a week of backtracking through alkali flats where water didn't exist and the sun cooked men inside their own skin. Traders wanted it. The army wanted it. Outlaws running from the law wanted it even more. None of them got it. She checked her traps every morning just after dawn. 12 snares positioned at intervals along the approach, designed to catch boots and hooves, not to kill but to warn. She reset each one by hand, careful not to disturb the sand patterns around them. If someone studied the ground long enough, they might notice the grooves weren't natural, but most men rode fast through open desert and never looked down until it was too late. 3 times in the past year she had found remains. Not from her traps. The desert handled its own justice when people made bad decisions about water and distance. She dragged the bodies off the path and covered them with stones, not out of ceremony but practicality. Bones drew scavengers and scavengers drew noise. She had been a wife once. Her husband had worked as a scout for a supply contractor, traveling between outposts and settlements, carrying messages and small parcels that needed discretion. He knew the desert better than most and trusted it less than anyone. That caution kept him alive for years until the day it didn't. A group of soldiers had accused him of stealing rifles from a supply wagon. No trial, no questions. They hanged him from a cottonwood near a dry wash and left him there as a warning. She cut him down 3 days later. The rope burns on his neck had drawn flies. His hands were still tied. She buried him in a place nobody would find, then walked into the desert and didn't stop until she reached the pass. That was 4 years ago. She had not left since. The widow kept a rifle, a revolver, and a knife. The rifle had belonged to her husband. The revolver she had taken from a man who tried to climb the rocks at night, thinking he could flank her position. He made it halfway up before loose shale gave way under his weight. She heard him fall and found him at sunrise with a broken back, still breathing. She gave him water and sat with him until he died, then took his gun and buried him under stones. The knife stayed on her belt. She used it for cutting rope, skinning rabbits, and trimming the ocotillo branches she wove into barriers across narrow sections of the pass. The thorns were long and sharp enough to lame a horse. She replaced them every few weeks. Twice a month, she walked 15 miles south to a trading post, run by a man who asked no questions and took payment in the form of work. She hauled goods, mended harnesses, and scraped hides in exchange for flour, coffee, ammunition, and salt. The man never asked why she lived alone or what she did with the time between visits. She never offered. On one trip, she overheard 2 drovers talking about the pass. One of them said a witch lived there. The other said it was a ghost. A third man, older and missing an eye, said it didn't matter what lived there because whatever it was had claimed 11 men in 2 years, and the army had officially declared the route unsafe. The drovers laughed. The old man didn't. She bought her supplies and left before anyone noticed her listening. The army had tried to force the pass exactly once. A lieutenant arrived with 20 soldiers, 2 wagons, and orders to establish a clear route through the canyon. They made camp a mile out and sent 3 scouts ahead on foot. The scouts found the traps. They reported back and the lieutenant ordered the traps destroyed. His men spent the afternoon pulling up snares and filling in the pits she had dug along the narrow sections. When they finished, they returned to camp, confident the way was clear. That night she reset every trap and added 6 more. The column moved out at dawn. The lead wagon made it a quarter-mile into the pass before the left front wheel dropped into a concealed pit and snapped the axle. The soldiers dismounted to assess the damage. While they worked, she triggered a rock slide from above. Not large enough to kill, but large enough to spook the horses. 2 of them bolted. One soldier was dragged 30 yards before he let go of the reins. The lieutenant called a halt and ordered his men to take defensive positions. They scanned the rocks but saw nothing. No movement, no smoke, no sign of an enemy. She watched them from a crack in the stone high above, perfectly still, her rifle resting across her knees. The soldiers waited an hour. Then 2. The sun climbed higher and the temperature in the canyon rose past 100 degrees. Men drank through their canteens faster than they should have. The lieutenant finally gave the order to pull back. They returned to their camp, regrouped, and rode south the next morning. She watched them go. The pass remained hers. But word spread. A woman was holding a canyon alone. Some said she was protecting Apache land. Others said she had gone mad with grief. A few claimed she was working with outlaws, using the pass as a bottleneck to rob anyone who tried to cross. None of it was true, but the stories grew anyway. A bounty hunter arrived in the summer. He approached on foot, leading his horse, a canteen in one hand and a white cloth tied to his rifle barrel. She watched him from a distance. He stopped 100 yards from the entrance and called out that he wanted to talk. She didn't answer. He tried again, said he wasn't there to fight. Said he respected what she was doing, but people needed to use the pass. He offered money, then supplies, then safe passage for her to wherever she wanted to go. She let him talk until he ran out of words. Then she fired a single shot into the ground 10 feet in front of him. He mounted his horse and left. 3 weeks later, a gang came through. 6 men, heavily armed, driving stolen cattle. They didn't bother with negotiations. They rode straight into the canyon at full speed, betting that momentum and numbers would carry them through. She let them get halfway in before she collapsed a section of the trail behind them, not with explosives. She had spent 2 months loosening a stone shelf above a narrow choke point, propping it with wood wedges that could be pulled from a distance using rope. When the gang was committed and couldn't turn back, she yanked the rope. 20 tons of rock fell and sealed the exit. The gang realized too late they were trapped. They tried to backtrack, but the pass only narrowed further ahead. She had funneled them into a box with no way out except the way they came, which was now buried. She didn't fire a shot. She waited. The men made camp and tried to dig through the rubble. It took them 2 days to realize it was hopeless. Their water ran out on the 3rd day. They tried to climb the walls, but the stone was sheer and brittle. One man fell and broke his leg. The others argued about what to do. By the 5th day, they were drinking their own urine. On the 7th day, she opened a gap in the rubble just wide enough for a man to crawl through. One at a time they dragged themselves out, delirious and broken. She watched from above as they stumbled into the desert. 2 of them didn't make it a mile. The others vanished into the heat. She sealed the gap again and reset the pass. The cattle died inside the canyon. She left them where they fell. The smell lasted for weeks. People stopped coming after that. Not all at once, but gradually. The stories had become too consistent. Too many men had failed to cross. The few who made it through alive told stories about falling rocks, disappearing trails, and a presence in the canyon that didn't want company. The pass gained a reputation. Cursed, some said. Haunted by the dead. The army updated their maps and marked it as impassable. Traders rerouted. Outlaws found other ways to run. The widow remained. She knew the real reason the pass had to stay closed. It wasn't about territory or revenge or protection of the land. It was about what lay beneath. Years before her husband died, he had been hired to guide a surveyor through the region. The surveyor worked for a mining concern out of California, searching for silver deposits. They spent 3 weeks mapping the hills and testing rock samples. One afternoon they descended into a deep ravine that fed into the pass and found a seam in the stone that didn't belong. Her husband told her about it later. Said the surveyor got excited, then scared. The seam wasn't silver. It was something else. A mineral her husband didn't recognize, dark green and veined with black, giving off a faint smell like sulfur and rust. The surveyor took samples and made notes. He told her husband not to mention it to anyone. 2 weeks later, the surveyor died. Camp fever, the report said. But her husband didn't believe it. He went back to the ravine alone and found the seam again. This time he noticed dead birds scattered around the opening. Dozens of them. No wounds. No signs of predation. Just dead. He told her the rock was poison. Not the kind you could see or taste, but the kind that seeped into the air and water. If a mining company opened that seam and hauled the ore out through the pass, it would contaminate everything downstream. The springs that fed the desert. The wells that kept the settlements alive. He reported it to the army. They ignored him. He tried the territorial governor. No response. He wrote letters to anyone he thought might listen. Nobody did. So when he died and she walked into the desert looking for a reason to keep breathing, she chose the pass. Not because it had been his fight. Because it was the only fight that mattered. She had spent 4 years keeping the pass closed so the seam would stay buried. Every man she turned back, every trap she set, every rock slide she triggered was to prevent someone from digging into stone that would kill thousands without ever making a sound. Nobody knew. Nobody would ever know. That was the point. But the weight of it was breaking her. She had stopped eating regularly. Some days she forgot to check the traps. She slept poorly and woke to the sound of her husband's voice calling her name, only to remember he was gone. The isolation was a slow grind that wore her down in ways the desert couldn't. One morning she woke and couldn't remember why she was there. She stood at the mouth of the pass and looked out at the empty flats and felt nothing. No anger, no purpose. Just exhaustion. She thought about walking away. Let someone else find the seam. Let the mining companies come. Let the poison spread. She had given 4 years. She had kept the line. That was enough. She packed her supplies and saddled the horse she kept in a hidden corral 2 miles south. She loaded her rifle and tied down her gear. She took one last look at the pass and started riding east. She made it 10 miles before she stopped. A dust cloud was rising in the distance, riders moving fast, heading toward the pass. She sat on her horse and watched the dust grow closer. She could turn around. She could keep riding. Let them go through. Let the consequences unfold without her. But she knew what would happen. The riders would find the seam. They would dig. They would haul the poison out through the pass and into the world. People would die, slowly, quietly, and nobody would know why. She turned the horse around and rode back. The riders were a military detail. 12 men led by a young officer with orders to survey the pass for a new telegraph line. They had tools, maps, and instructions to blast through any obstacles they found. She reached the pass an hour before they did. She didn't have time to reset all the traps. She set what she could and took a position on the high rocks with her rifle. When the detail arrived, she fired a warning shot. The officer called out that they were there on official business and ordered her to stand down. She fired again, closer this time. The soldiers took cover and returned fire. Bullets ricocheted off the stone around her. She moved positions and fired twice more, aiming for the ground near their horses. The animals panicked. 2 soldiers were thrown. The officer rallied his men and ordered a flanking maneuver. 3 soldiers moved up the east wall while the rest provided covering fire. She watched them climb and waited until they were committed to the ascent. Then she triggered another rock slide. The rocks came down hard and fast. One soldier was caught in the slide and carried 30 feet down. The other two barely made it to cover. The officer called a retreat. But as the detail pulled back, one of the soldiers threw a torch into the brush near the canyon entrance. The dry wood caught immediately. Flames spread fast, fed by wind funneling through the pass. The fire forced her down from the rocks. She tried to move through the smoke, but the heat was too intense. She fell back toward the interior of the canyon, choking on ash, her eyes burning. The soldiers withdrew and watched the fire from a distance. The officer assumed she had been trapped inside. He marked the pass as destroyed by wildfire and led his men back to report. The fire burned for 2 days. It consumed the Ocotillo barriers, the rope traps, and most of the brush that provided cover. The heat cracked sections of the stone walls and caused further rock slides that buried parts of the trail. She survived by retreating deep into the canyon, into the ravine where the seam was hidden. She covered her face with wet cloth and waited for the fire to burn itself out. When the smoke finally cleared, she emerged and surveyed the damage. The pass was unrecognizable. Entire sections had collapsed. The trail was buried under rubble. The entrance was choked with burned debris. It would take an army to clear it now, maybe more. The pass had become what she had always tried to make it, impassable. She walked through the ruins and felt something close to relief. The seam was still buried. The fire had sealed it further under tons of fallen rock. It would stay hidden for years, maybe decades, maybe longer. She left the canyon and rode to the trading post. She sold her rifle and bought passage on a wagon heading east. The man at the post asked where she was going. She didn't answer. 3 months later, a surveyor working for the territorial government tried to access the pass with a crew of laborers. They spent a week attempting to clear the entrance before giving up. The surveyor filed a report recommending the pass be permanently abandoned due to structural instability. The army agreed. The route was removed from all active maps. Within a year, the stories about the pass had faded into rumor. Within 5 years, most people had forgotten it existed. The widow never returned. She worked as a cook in a mining camp 200 miles east, then as a laundress in a small town near the rail line. She kept to herself and spoke rarely. Nobody asked about her past. She lived another 20 years and died quietly in a boarding house during a cold winter. The woman who found her said she looked peaceful. No one ever learned what she had guarded. No one ever learned why. The pass remained closed. The poison stayed buried. The desert reclaimed the stone. Some protection is invisible. Some sacrifices are carried alone. True strength doesn't need a witness. The wind still moves through the canyon, but no one walks there anymore.
Thanks for watching this story till the end. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And before you go, check out these other amazing Western stories waiting for you next. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you on the next ride.